Hey, did you know that one suburban neighborhood built after World War II changed the way Americans lived, while also becoming one of the most controversial communities in American history? Picture yourself in 1945. The Second World War has just come to an end. After years of fighting overseas, you're finally coming home. You survived the beaches of Normandy or the jungles of the Pacific, and like millions of other veterans, you're ready to leave the war behind and begin the next chapter of your life. You want what most Americans wanted at the time: a steady job, a family, and a place to call home. But when you arrive back to the United States, you discover something unexpected. There aren't enough homes. Cities are overcrowded, apartment buildings are packed with young families, and some newly married couples are forced to live with their parents because they simply can't find a place to call their own. Others spend months searching for an affordable home that doesn't exist. America had just won the largest war in human history. Now it's faced with one of the largest housing shortages in its own history. Then, almost overnight, something remarkable began happening on Long Island, New York. Thousands of acres of farmlands were transformed into neat rows of nearly identical houses. An entire neighborhood seemed to appear out of nowhere. Streets, schools, parks, shopping centers, and backyards all sprang up at a pace that had never been seen before. For millions of Americans, it looked like the future. But beneath the excitement was another story, one that revealed not everyone was invited to share the dream. This is the story of Levittown. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Hey Did You Know, where we dig up the weird, the forgotten, and the downright strange corners of America. Quick reminder, as always, before we dive in, make sure you hit the subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you don't miss an episode. We release every episode every other Wednesday. And don't forget to leave a comment with your thoughts, because I love to know what you guys think. Now, let's get into the story. In 1945, the United States emerged from the war as one of the most powerful nations on Earth. The economy was booming. Factories that had spent years producing tanks and aircraft were beginning to shift back to consumer goods, and more than 16,000 Americans who had served in the armed forces were returning home. For many of those veterans, the future looked bright. They had survived the war. They wanted to settle down, get married, start families, and build the kind of life they had spent years fighting to protect. But there was one problem. America didn't have enough homes. During the war, residential construction had slowed dramatically. Builders weren't focused on new neighborhoods. Labor, lumber, steel, concrete, and countless other materials had been redirected towards the war effort. By the time the fighting ended, years of limited home construction had left the country with a severe housing shortage. As millions of veterans returned home, marriage rates soared. Before long, so did birth rates. Between 1946 and 1964, America experienced what had become known as the baby boom, a period that saw more than 76 million babies born. Young families were growing faster than the country could build places for them to live. Many newly married couples moved in with their parents because they couldn't find a home of their own. Others crowded small apartments, often sharing limited spaces with relatives, while they waited for housing to become available. In some cities, temporary housing developments and even converted military barracks were used to help meet the overwhelming demand. Recognizing the challenges veterans face, Congress passed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, better known as the GI Bill. Today, it's remembered for helping veterans attend college, but it also transformed homeownership. The law guaranteed low-interest home loans through the Veterans Administration, making it possible for millions of former servicemen to buy a house with little or no down payment. It was one of the most ambitious programs in American history. But there was a catch. A mortgage didn't build a house. Veterans had the financing, but what they didn't have was somewhere to use it. And that's where one man saw an opportunity unlike anyone else. And his name? William Levitt. William wasn't an architect, nor did he invent suburban housing. His father Abraham had founded the family construction company Levitt & Sons years earlier, building homes on Long Island. Before and during World War II, William helped expand the business and while serving in the U.S. Navy Seabees, he saw firsthand how standardized construction methods could rapidly produce military housing. When the war ended, he came home with an idea. Instead of building one house from start to finish, why not build houses the same way Henry Ford built automobiles? Levitt divided construction into a series of specialized jobs. One crew poured the concrete slabs, another framed the walls, another installed the windows, while separate teams handled the plumbing, electrical, and painting. As soon as one crew completed a task, it moved on to the next house, allowing the other team to take its place. The result was an assembly line approach to home building unlike anything the country had seen before. By the summer of 1948, Levitt & Sons was completing as many as 30 homes every day, an astonishing pace for the time traditional builders simply couldn't compete with. William Levitt had found a way to build quality homes faster and more affordably than almost anyone thought possible. Now, he just needed one thing: a place big enough to put his idea to the test. The place where William Levitt chose wasn't some empty desert or forgotten stretch of wilderness. It was thousands of acres of potato fields in the town of Hampstead on Long Island. To most people, it was just farmland, but to William Levitt, it was an amazing opportunity to build an entire new way of living. Construction began in 1947, and what happened next amazed the country. Levitt & Sons didn't just simply build houses. The company controlled nearly every part of the construction process. It purchased materials in enormous quantities, operated its own lumber mills, manufactured many of its own building components, and coordinated dozens of specialized crews working in carefully timed succession. Every step was designed to eliminate wasted time, reduce costs, and keep construction moving. The homes themselves were modest by today's standards. The first model, known as the Cape Cod, measured roughly 750 square feet. It included 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a living room, and a kitchen, and an unfinished attic that could be later converted into additional bedrooms as families grew. They weren't luxurious. In fact, many critics complained that all the houses looked exactly the same. Rows of nearly identical Cape Cod homes stretched across what had once been open farmland, but families buying them didn't care. For many Americans, these homes offered conveniences they had never had before. Every house came equipped with modern appliances, including a refrigerator and a washing machine, along with central heating, indoor plumbing, and something many families had never experienced: their own backyard. Just as remarkable as homes themselves was the price. The earliest Levittown houses rented for nearly $60 a month before Levitt & Sons shifted into selling them for around $8,000. Thanks to government-backed mortgages available through the GI Bill, many veterans discovered that owning one of these new homes could actually cost less each month than continuing to rent an apartment. As more families moved in, Levittown quickly became much more than a collection of houses. Schools were built to accommodate the growing baby boom generation. Shopping centers made everyday errands convenient, while parks, playgrounds, and community spaces transformed what had once been farmland into a thriving suburban town. For thousands of young families, it represented a fresh start after years of depression and war. As revolutionary as Levitt's methods were, he wasn't the only builder trying to solve America's housing crisis. Across the country, California had become another center of post-war suburban growth. Builders there embraced large-scale construction techniques that became known as the California method. On-site sawmills, prepackaged lumber, standardized floor plans, and bulk ordering of fixtures allowed developers to build neighborhoods at speeds that would have seemed impossible only a few years earlier. One of the best examples was Lakewood, near Long Beach, California, built between 1950 and 1953. The development contained roughly 17,500 homes, rivaling the size of the original Levittown. Farther north, at San Lorenzo Village, outside Oakland, nearly 2,500 workers used similar mass production techniques to complete a new house roughly every 45 minutes during peak construction. Yet, even among these enormous developments, Levitt & Sons stood apart. After completing 17,447 homes in the original Levittown, New York, the company went on to build 3 more Levittowns in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland. Together, these 4 planned communities contained more than 50,000 homes, making Levitt & Sons the single largest builder of suburban housing during the post-war era. Word spread quickly about the community rising from the potato fields on Long Island. Applications poured in as thousands of veterans and young families hoped to become part of what many believed was the American dream. But beneath the excitement, another story was beginning to unfold. Applications poured in almost as quickly as the houses themselves were being built. For thousands of veterans and young families, owning a home in Levittown seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Some prospective buyers waited in lines for a chance to purchase one of the new homes. Others submitted applications hoping their names would be selected before the next selection of the development sold out. The American dream finally seemed within reach, but beneath the excitement, there was another story unfolding. For many Americans, that dream wasn't available to them, not because they couldn't afford a home or because they hadn't served for their country, but because of the color of their skin. Although the GI Bill made homeownership possible for millions of veterans, qualifying for a mortgage and actually being allowed to buy a home were two very different things. The law itself did not prohibit black veterans from receiving benefits, but throughout much of the country, those benefits were often undetermined by discriminatory lending practices, local housing policies, and private developers who refused to sell homes to black families. Levittown became one of the most visible examples of that system. Levitt & Sons maintained a policy that effectively excluded black families from purchasing homes in the original Levittown on Long Island. Restrictive languages and early leases and sale agreements, combined with the lending practices and federal housing policies of the era, meant that development remained overwhelmingly white during its early years. William Levitt never tried to hide his position. When asked about integrating his developments, he publicly argued that selling homes to black families would make it more difficult to sell houses to white buyers. He believed he was responding to market demand, even if that meant excluding black qualified veterans from communities his company was building. His comments drew criticism even at that time. The NAACP and other civil rights organizations argued that black veterans who had fought for their same country, worn the same uniform, and qualified for the same government-backed mortgages deserved the opportunity to buy a home. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. Two veterans could return home from World War II with identical military records. Both could qualify for a mortgage through the GI Bill. Only one could move into a brand new suburban neighborhood and begin building wealth that might benefit his family for generations, while the other may never even be given the chance to buy the house. The issue reached a national breaking point in 1957. By then, Levitt & Sons had expanded beyond Long Island and built another massive planned community in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. That year, William and Daisy Mayers became the first black family to purchase a home in Levittown, Pennsylvania. Almost immediately, the neighborhood erupted. Hundreds of angry protesters gathered outside the Myers home. Crowds shouted racial slurs late into the night. Rocks were thrown through windows. Property was vandalized. The demonstrations continued for days as some residents attempted to intimidate the family into leaving the neighborhood. A group calling themselves the Levittown Betterment Committee organized efforts to oppose the mayor's family's presence. Many segregationist residents gathered at a nearby house that became known as the Confederate House, where a Confederate flag flew outside while the song Dixie played repeatedly from the record player. The message was unmistakable. The mayor's family was not welcome, but not everybody in Levittown stood with the mob. As news of the attacks spread across the country, support began arriving from all directions. The Quakers, the American Jewish Congress, the William Penn Center organized a 24-hour citizen patrol to help protect the Myers family and discourage further violence. White neighbors volunteered to babysit the Myers children, clean up broken windows and damaged property after attacks, and stood beside the family as a public show of support. Martin Luther King Jr., along with other civil rights leaders, personally reached out to William and Daisy Myers with letters of encouragement, recognizing that their struggle represented something much larger than one family buying a house. Despite months of harassment, the Myers family refused to leave. They remained in Levittown for another 4 years before William accepted a new position in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and the family relocated. Historians often point the Myers family experience as one of the many events that helped build public support for the Fair Housing Act of 1968, a landmark legislation that made it illegal to discriminate in the sale, rental, or financing of a housing because of race. Levittown had become a symbol for American dream, but it also had become a symbol for America's greatest contradictions. A place built to help millions of families find a home had just shown the nation just how difficult that dream could be for others. Today, Levittown still exists. Drive through its streets and you'll find families mowing their lawns, Children riding bikes, neighbors chatting across driveways, and homes that have been remodeled and expanded far beyond their original designs. At first glance, it looks like countless other suburban communities across America, and that's what makes it so remarkable. Before Levittown, the American suburb as we know it today barely existed, and the idea of owning a modest home with a backyard, living on a quiet street outside the city, and commuting to work each morning wasn't yet the standard for millions of Americans. Levittown helped turn that vision into reality, forever changing the American landscape. For thousands of returning veterans, it represented a fresh start after years of war. It gave ordinary working families a chance to own a home, raise children, and build a wealth that could be passed down for generations. But that opportunity wasn't shared equally. Many black veterans had served the same country, earned the same GI Bill benefit, and dreamed of providing the same future for their families. Yet, discriminatory housing policies and practices extending far beyond one neighborhood on Long Island often kept that dream just out of reach. And that's what makes the story of Levittown so important. It isn't simply just a story of a neighborhood. It's a story of post-war America. It shows us how innovation, ambition, and opportunity help shape the modern middle class, while also reminding us that the progress doesn't always reach everyone at the same time. Levittown became both the blueprint for American suburb and one of the most recognizable symbols of the inequalities woven into that dream. Perhaps that's why historians continue to study it nearly 80 years later. Not because the houses were remarkable, but because what they represented. So here's my question to you. When you hear the words American dream, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? And do you think that dream looks the same way today as it did for families moving into Levittown in the 1940s and 50s? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know. But I want to thank you all for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and don't forget to follow because you're not going to want to miss the next one. Because next time, we're heading to Kentucky, where an old railroad trestle has become the center of one of America's strangest cryptid legends. Some say half man, half goat lurks beneath the bridge, waiting for anyone brave to cross it. Until next time, thanks for listening.